Okay, well, welcome everybody. Apologies for that. As Deb's said, my name's Steve DeVoe. I'm the manager of what we call the Fuel Management Program in Forest Fire Management Victoria, which is part of DELP. And Forest Fire Management Victoria incorporates the fire and burning component within DELP. It also includes Parks Victoria, Vic Forests and Melbourne Water. For those who aren't familiar with Forest Fire Management Victoria. So today I've been asked to share with you Forest Fire Management Victoria's experience and processes we've been working with around pursuing some quality assurance processes that have come of light in recent years. Just as some background, obviously when we collectively run burn programs, we're obviously undertaking fairly high-risk activities that can, in instances, have high levels of consequence. So obviously a quality assurance system is a good foundation for our burn program to have embedded in it. And as people would possibly be aware, in 2015 in October, during spring, with some pretty wild weather, a burn escaped its control lines and did a fair bit of damage in the community around Lancefield in central Victoria. And consequently, as happens with these things, there's the important reviews into what's happened and recommendations to the appropriate organisation about how they could implement some systems and processes to not only support their staff in undertaking these often complex and high-risk activities, but also to make every endeavour to ensure that these types of things don't happen again or minimise the risk as much as possible. So the outcomes from the reviews into the burn escape in 2015 had a whole suite of recommendations, but one I'm going to focus on today was about how we incorporated quality assurance processes into our burning program. And with that recommendation, or perhaps in conjunction with it, FFMVIC developed an audit and quality assurance framework for all of bushfire management. And that covered the whole suite of fire management activities, not just burning. So the framework was put in place to facilitate maintenance of standards, continuous improvement, and to manage those risks of the various activities. So we had, after the burn escape, we had quite a rapid rebuild of our burn planning and risk assessment processes to try and incorporate the recommendations around quality assurance. So that was actually supported by some work that had been done previously by some of our colleagues up in Canberra and in ACT and New South Wales, and last week we know Brian Levine presented information on where the decision support tool is heading. And in the early stages, through work between Brian and his colleagues and our department, we were able to adopt some of the principles and processes included in that decision support tool and embed them into part of our risk assessment processes. So that is the first element on the list that you're looking at that I wanted to talk about today, is how we undertake peer review and burn plan and risk assessment as part of our quality assurance processes. And so that one's very much embedded in the actual burn planning and approvals process. The second element I wanted to talk to today was something that we're still in the process of implementing and working this through to make it more effective as well, is a process to, at a more of a state level, including with contributions from out at region and district experienced staff who can look at a suite of burns and their plans and provide some feedback on those. And the third element of quality assurance I wanted to talk about today was a pilot process or process that we commenced last year, looking at implementing an observation and feedback program. So they're the three key elements I was going to talk to you today about. But I did want to highlight that for those who work closely with this, we all know that our foundation of delivering burn programs and individual burns is also based on some other really key elements to support quality outcomes, whether they're defined quite specifically as quality assurance processes. I'm not sure, but I wanted to mention them because we train people, we mentor them, we use experience where it's needed most. We have procedures and guidelines to support our burning operations, and I'm sure all other organisations have the same. So they, are really foundations to creating an environment where we can strive for quality outcomes, and I'm sure other organisations like ours, we have review processes built into our annual program where we look at how our processes are working and try and improve them. So these three elements I'm going to talk to today are above and beyond what we already have as some of our founding principles that we work to. So on to element one of this quality assurance processes, and this element I'll be spending most of the time today discussing because it's the one that's most advanced in how we're operating, and so it's really about utilising peer review with our burn planning. And we do this for every burn. And we do it at each level in the organisation, and that's somewhat reflecting risk, but we include elements of peer review in every burn at least at the district and regional level. And when a burn is escalated to the state level because of a heightened risk or profile or complexity, then it's also reviewed at the state level. The whole the risk assessment tool that we've put in place somewhat mirrors some elements of the decision support tool I mentioned earlier, and we feel that what's important as part of this peer review and the risk process is ensuring that we have a clear account of the risks and the controls and the constraints around the operation. so that all people who are able to look at that tool can have a view to what's going on and why, and what some of the background is. So even in reflecting how some of those decisions have been made. And what we're finding is that that's really supporting our staff. It's supporting our burn planning staff. It's supporting our burn delivery staff, some of whom undertake both those activities, of course. It supports our risk assessments, definitely supports our burn approvals processes, and it flows through and supports our scheduling and ignition of burns. So the fact that it's integrated into our delivery process rather than a stand aside is a real benefit. I'll just put an example up on the screen now so that people can see what our current risk tool looks like. I will say that this will be evolving further soon, but some principles that I've outlined here we definitely want to maintain through any further developments. But this example I put up here outlines at the burn planning stage. So it is a summary of the key contextual elements and challenges, and a view to some of the risk around the delivery of the particular burn operation. It gives an opportunity to summarise the burn objectives and the importance or the criticality of the burn, and then it gives an opportunity to reflect on what are the various challenges. We've got them broken into about 7 fields, reflecting on things like the fire history or so any challenges we've had with that type of operation in the past or that specific operation, and any of the technical challenges with respect to fuel and fire behaviour. We look at the assets, infrastructure nearby, so what are the things we need to be really aware of while we undertake the burn. Any of the significant cultural and environmental values can be highlighted in terms of the delivery of the burn. What are the key elements with respect to resources and shift planning. Reflection on how we've considered any response to a burn escape, so contingency planning arrangements, so that we have a planned and prepared response to any breach of control lines. How community stakeholders and partners may be affected or involved. Could include things like traffic or impacts on community through smoke impacting sensitive assets or infrastructure, or it could be impact on industry such as vignerons or tourism, and then any specific safety constraints or issues with that particular burn. So each of those contextual areas can be rated in terms of their sort of significance. So moving on to where the peer review supports this next slide I've got up highlights a bit of a opportunity for a reflection of the key elements or key issues with the burn and a bit of a summary, and who were the staff that contributed to the peer review. And then this proceeds along out of that peer review process to the district manager for their comments and approval, and then to the regional, in our case, which is the Assistant Chief Fire Officer, out in the region, once again for their consideration and any comments or additional constraints and approval. And if escalated, we've also, the example I've got here has one that's actually gone to the Chief Fire Officer at state level. So I just wanted to highlight here the context elements that I've mentioned. We're really seeing them as being important parts of the burn plan. At the moment, they are showing up in this form a little bit in isolation to the burn plan, and that just reflects that our burn planning system and process hasn't kept up with this particular way of reflecting these elements. But for future updates with our burn plans, we would be wanting to reincorporate many of those elements I've highlighted there back into the burn plan, but the peer review elements, we want to definitely maintain those. This planning element, then once that's got through its planning approvals, then flows into supporting decisions around scheduling and ignition. So the next slide I've got up indicates the peer review and the process we work through to schedule the burn, which is 24 to 48 hours ahead of ignition. And that's so that this involves a reflection on are we proceeding into running this burn as we said we would in the planning phase, and are our risks and still as we assess them, is the context still as we assessed it, and are we within the defined parameters for the prescription. And so this form I've got up here just indicates there's opportunity. This one's not completed, but it's got opportunity to reflect key comments, particularly from at the district level, where the district burn team, which is essentially under the burns controller, making recommendations, and then the district manager. This is just in the pre-scheduling phase before the incident control is in place. Is able to comment on that, and then it escalates up once again to a regional burn team, and then the assistant chief officer. If things are pretty much as defined in the planning phase, then the comments there would be just reflecting that. If there was a change in the conditions or the context that was described, perhaps due to seasonal constraints or just the passage of time, then this part of the form allows for just reflecting on any of those changes, and then if need be, it could go to state level. We don't have too many of those. And the next slide I've put up takes us through to the actual final approval on ignition, which is once again flowing out of the scheduling, but now we're into the actual ignition. Are things still as we expected they should be, or as we planned for them to be? And if so, then that's an easy comment for the burn team to make to the burns controller. If there's any change in the context or the weather outlook or the like, that can be considered in here. And if necessary, it can escalate beyond the burns controller back to our assistant chief officer if required. So just in summary, I wanted to highlight what we have found to be some positives in what we've introduced with this peer review supporting our burn planning, scheduling and ignition, and also supporting our approvals process. So we've found that by this approach, we've definitely seen a much greater increase in transparency in what's going on. That's a real positive, because in any process that requires people to approve something, that people approving it have to have a clear view to what they're approving. And we feel that the way we've been able to use this process has certainly supported that. It ensures everybody's informed about the risk assessment, with a clear account of those risks, even indicating how some of those risks were assessed. If at all possible, we want to try and indicate how we've come to those decisions, and what controls would be in place, and any constraints that would be necessary on that delivery. We've found that this process does support our staff. It supports our burn delivery staff. That we've really got to be mindful that in delivering complex and risky operations, it's really important to ensure that staff feel supported, and any process that keeps the organisational commitment to its staff before, during and after a burn is a real win, and I think we can all probably reflect on times where that hasn't been the case, where the sense has been that people knew a burn was happening, but they didn't know enough of the detail, and so they become a little bit more distant to what was actually going on, and it can result in just a very small number of individuals left standing in the middle. So this process has been built to try and reduce that likelihood. I lost my little cursor here. So this shared decision making is definitely an important part of this. Now, this process we've introduced can escalate with the risk, and provides a record of the decisions that were made, and it informs the approvals. So there's some of the real positives we've seen out of this experience. Everything comes at a cost, so we've identified some of our issues. These came to light fairly quickly, but and we're still struggling with some of them, particularly the administrative load and just the systems, getting the systems to work smoothly has certainly been one of our challenges across a program that can be up to 600 or 800 burns per year, and we're doing it for every burn. So it's certainly a high workload, but the positive is that the staff are feeling that they're getting benefit out of it. But we do have a goal of trying to integrate some of these processes back into our planning and other systems, and that's just reflecting that when we next update our burn planning platform, we would incorporate these types of improvements. So that brings me to the end of element 1 with respect to quality assurance. The next two elements, I'll just change the slide. I'll cover a bit more quickly because they're work in progress for us, but I just wanted to highlight some key things that we're trying to implement and incorporate into our program. So the second element is we're terming it a state burn plan review process. It's a review and lessons sharing process that is to support not just staff, but to support our systems and process improvements, support our guidelines, and support or further improve decision support tools. It provides this review process will basically gather some commitment from people out at the coalface to review burns from other parts of the state, so certainly outside their own area, and we hope to review them with respect to some of the quality and consistency elements to burn planning. But we also wish to incorporate in the longer term observations from various other review activities. And so this is very much in line with a lessons sharing type processes. So I've just on this next slide highlighted the lessons sharing framework, or the systems flow, which is hopefully reflective of any debrief or program reviews that you may run in other organisations. How you make observations about what's going on in terms of what might have been planned and what actually happened. Then you analyse. The second step is you analyse those observations for any insights or lessons that would be important, and then the third step is that you share those lessons and insights with others. It's certainly, the goal there is obviously to contribute to continuous improvement within the organisation, and as I said before, all its systems and processes and decision support tools. And as I mentioned before, the current status of this element of quality assurance is still being introduced, but we've got the concepts up. It's a matter of now trying to test those concepts and create an appropriate way of coordinating the reviews, giving people the guidance as to what they're looking at, and then a place for people to record their observations, their analysis, so any insights or lessons they might want to share, and then how we actually share that. It is an area of work we're focusing on in lessons sharing as part of one of our the State of Victoria projects, being the Safer Together project, which is working with CFA and others to try and improve the way we work collectively together in these sorts of areas and delivery. That's the second element of the QA we're working on, and I'll just go now to the third element, which is we've called an observation and feedback process. This one's more at the personal level rather than at the systems level. We introduced a pilot program of this last autumn, so it was trialled, and we're going to extend that as best we can this autumn, but bringing with it some of the things we've observed from last year's pilot. So this process is modelled on what's called the behaviour-based safety process. That terminology was new to me, but the words in themselves are useful, and they sort of describe what's going on here. So safety is in all of our thinking, and quality assurance and safety are elements that should go hand in hand. So a behaviour-based safety process is one that would enhance all of the other elements of a safety or quality process system that we've got in place. I mentioned some of those earlier, like our training, like our systems processes, like our, whether it's PPE or engineering solutions to safety issues. This focuses on how individuals behave, how they assess risk, how they manage it, the decisions they make, often in times of complex and perhaps some stress, with tight timelines and significant consequences. So this is really trying to support the individuals to complement all the other things that are put in place. And as we know, you can't rely on standard operating procedures alone to be a safe place to work. So this process is built around observation, where an observer provides feedback to a burn officer in charge, or whatever terminology you might use out there for the person managing a burn. The interesting thing here is I'd like to highlight is that this should promote professional development for both participants. Now, that anyone who's experienced teaching or instructing knows that being put in the position of teaching or instructing ensures that you have a good understanding of something, so the teacher learns by having to teach. Equally, the observer can learn, but can also provide feedback to the person being observed, and also ask questions that are searching and help in this case, the burn officer in charge learn by having to explain some of their decisions. The pilot we tried last year, we had mixed feedback, which is not surprising, because it's a challenging space for people. We all, as people who run burns, like to see ourselves as expert in our location, in our approach, and in the challenges we meet at in our locality and in our own environment. That's all understood, and we understand why those feelings are there. But the things that we need to reflect on with the way the pilot was introduced was that it had quite a rigid approach. So it almost reflected a different sort of work environment than ours. And as we know, our workplace, when you're running burns and fighting fires, is a very dynamic work environment. And so any of these sorts of things have to equally be dynamic. And it was, in this first instance, and still is, this pilot, it's limited to those who are trained to participate. And that was quite a deliberate decision, and that's okay, and I think that's legitimate, because it's making sure that if we're going to try this, we're trying it with everybody's understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and test some things before we take them further. So what we've learned out of last year's pilot is that how you implement something like this, it has to be the key to its success. And there's obviously a different number, there's probably a countless number of ways you can actually implement this, or quite a number of ways you can implement it. And so this certainly needs some further thought and testing. It does bring with it some resourcing challenges, but my thoughts, and I know these are supported by some other people who are close to this pilot and also have a lot of experience in running burns and fires and people and supporting others in their development, is that if we can build this into more of a business as usual approach. So this is the way we work, rather than we're doing this off to the side, then we will have a much greater chance of success. And so the points I've just put there really highlight what I think we'll be trying to steer this in the direction of in the longer term, is to incorporate this as our normal business. This is okay. This is not a threatening process. This is a supportive process. It's one of two-way coaching and mentoring and feedback. And in fact, my experience and others has been that when we have a tough burn or a tough fire to fight, we intuitively pair people up anyway, because we know that someone supporting someone else in a complex situation provides a lot of benefit. And so if we promote the benefits that we inherently take when we've got those challenges and build them into the way we run our program, and more across the board rather than just by people's natural response, then that would be a good thing. So that would essentially allow very local implementation of this, rather than someone else telling you what to do. You have this as the way we work here locally, and each local environment does that as well. Obviously, some level of coordination at state and regional level to support it, keep it on track, make sure that we are progressing, and that we're taking it seriously as opportunity for personal and professional development, and improving people's capacity to work in that high pressure, complex environment, and making sure they feel supported in it. And then ultimately we'd like that to feed back into lessons sharing processes. So that brings me to the end of the three, covering off the three elements that we're currently using or implementing, starting to implement. So I've just put a summary slide up there to allow people to just see that and allow for any questions.
Thank you very much, Steve. I can see there's some potential for the Centre of Excellence to feed off some of those reviews, lessons learned that you're doing, and potentially disseminate them around the country, but that might be a discussion for a little further down the track when you've got it more up and running. So what I'm going to do now, just bear with me, I've got to do a little bit of fancy keying in, and I'll open the lines up for questions from anybody else.
The moderator has placed the conference into presentation mode. All participants are now muted. The moderator has placed the conference into conversation mode. All participants are now unmuted.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Steve?
Yes, Deb, it's Paul Black from Parks in Tassie.
Hi Paul, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks for putting on the webinar, Deb and Steve.
My pleasure.
Yeah, okay, so I'll just jump in then. Two questions perhaps rolled into one for you, Steve, about your peer review process. How are your peers selected, and what's the process of them about recording the review of the burn plan? For example, do they simply provide a signature on the burn plan, or is there some sort of record that they've actually assessed the content of the plan in various stages of the plan?
Okay, the peers, how the peers are selected, I'll cover that one first. The foundation of burn planning, preparation for delivery and allocation of the right person to run a burn, that sits in our organisation anyway neatly at the district level, at the local level. And so we've got a district manager leading each district. In years gone by, before we had district managers, we had fire management officers who did that. And so that individual took a lead on understanding the complexities of their various operations and the skills that were in place or embedded in each of the team members, and based on their experience and past performance and that. So that's sort of quite a natural sort of flow at the local level for the right people to be involved, looking at the right burns. We haven't formally said this is what you've got to do to choose the right peers to support, and we haven't even mandated how many peers you need to support any one burn. We've just promoted a principle of, well, if it's simple and low risk, and a couple of you, that pops up to the district manager and everyone agrees, yeah, look, this one's simple, we did this pretty quick, there's only a couple of us had a look, and the DM says, yeah, that's cool, no worries. This other one over here was more complex. We had a much harder look at that, and we got a few extra people involved with different skills. So that's just quite intuitive. So that's how that's working. Equally at the regional level, once it pops up there, we have people whose their function is in management of or coordination and management of a region-wide program, and so we're expecting that they would bring their skills to the table when they're looking at it at a regional level, and that could be regional burn coordinators, regional managers. Obviously, the assistant chief fire officers look at them. It's front and centre of their job is to assistant chief fire officers look at them. It's front and centre of their job is to manage the program for delivery. We can get people with fire behaviour analyst skills and community engagement people involved with and environmental or cultural specialists involved in some of the complex situations. In fact, we often do right at the start of the burn planning process. So we feel that's all pretty much embedded. The process to record is essentially the form that I took you through that there. So there may be other supporting documents back in the district or attached to the burn plan as well. But this form that I put up at the moment, that's basically where we're just giving a bit of the summary.
Right, thanks for that, Steve.
No worries. We've actually there's plenty of stuff that's complicated enough in our world, and I guess with this we tried to keep it as simple and open as possible, at least anyway. So.
Any other questions for Steve? I have a question, Steve. If you can shoot back to about slide 9, I think it was.
Tell me when to stop.
Yep, that's good.
That's the one?
When you're doing your pre-scheduling risk assessment, the likelihood and consequence, what are you assessing the likelihood of?
Okay, I didn't go too much into this, and I didn't put up the whole document, but those scores reflect the outcomes of the decision support tool that Brian Levine presented on last month. Okay. Yep. So we've, as I said, as I introduced, when we put this thing together, we worked collaboratively with Brian and others who had been working on this up in New South Wales and said, look, we know you've done this good work. Can we take some elements of it without changing the integrity of what you've done, but build some stuff around it? And what we've done is build some stuff around that decision support tool. Our future goal is to, as I said, is to work with that planning elements being embedded back in the burn plan, whereas that would just be a summary document, so you just pull that out of your burn plan. And we do have views of working back towards the decision support tool process to support the scheduling and ignition, which we've got embedded in this form, and that's one of the clunky bits of it. Yeah, for lots of state level reasons here, pushed by the political and other bits of fallout that were going on at the time, we were forced to create something that was going to take us forward like this in the interim. And as I said, we're keen to move in line with the decision support tool that Brian's been talking about with others.
Right. And if you flip forward to slide 10.
Yep.
In the bottom half of that, you can see the likelihood's 57.2, but then it drops to 22. Is that based on controls that you've put in place since the initial scheduling? Is that the right understanding?
That reflects. I think that reflects we haven't filled out that part of the form yet.
Okay.
Yep. So that's just because the example I put up was a form that's halfway through.
All right.
So don't worry about the numbers in there, and I didn't want any focus to be on any numbers. Because we've got some challenges with the numbers anyway, so I was just focusing on the context and the workflow and the way we incorporate that peer review through to the approvals.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, thanks for asking there. I probably should have clarified it as we went through.
Yep. Okay, so that's it from me. Does anybody else have any questions?
Everyone's out burning.
It's Dirk Richards from National Parks here in New South Wales. Just a question about the observation and feedback program, how you're selling that to your staff.
Well, by increments at the moment. So last year it was a pilot, as I said, and we trained a fairly small number of participants. I can't remember the exact number, but it could have been 30 or 40. We've got 250 or 300 burn officers in charge across the state. And as I said, we run, 600 or 800 burns each year. So by small increments, and by really carefully testing each step, as I indicated, because this is a really sensitive part of any staff member who's involved in burning would know that there's sensitivity when others come looking over your shoulder. And who are you to be looking at what I do because I'm the expert in this patch, and I was alluding to that when I spoke earlier. So that's why I made the recommendations at the end of the presentation about building this is quite normal to pair people up, and it's quite a normal, and it's not about the observer being more experienced than the deliverer. It doesn't flow that way. If we build it into normal business, if we create an environment that says there's only this very elite group who can be observers, then I think we further entrench this sort of distant approach that we'll get from the participants. Whereas if we say, no, your observer might be someone who's brand new, but they're going to be told they need to ask you lots of questions. And so it'll put you as the officer in charge having a responsibility to share your thinking and your decision making to this person and let them ask questions, and they might ask you questions that prompt your thinking in new ways.
Yeah, okay, very good.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's the answer, but it's just my gut feel that would be possibly one of the more successful ways of trying to do something like this.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I don't know whether other people have got a view from their own experience on how these things could go, or whether people have got similar programs that they've attempted to put into place. It'd be interesting to know.
Perhaps if they have any comments, they can direct them to me via email, and I'll forward them to you, Steve.
Yeah, okay.
I've got another question someone's put up online, and that is the question is the risk scheduling available for download?
Scheduling. Okay, hang on a second.
I guess the question is, are you willing to make that peer review sheet that you've developed available publicly? or are you just...
Well, it hasn't been done yet. The burn hasn't been delivered, it hasn't been scheduled, so I grabbed a live one that hasn't actually been scheduled yet.
I think in terms of other agencies using your process, I think that would be something we'd probably need to talk about offline as the Centre of Excellence being a centre point for tools that are available, and then particular people who are interested in them can go to the agencies that have developed them, perhaps for a one-on-one meeting to see how they can adapt the tools for themselves. Kind of like how Forest Fire Management have gone to Brian Levine around the decision support tool and said, yes, we like it, and taken it, but they've also worked with Brian to adapt it to fit into their own process.
Yeah. So if the question's specific to this burn, well, no, we haven't even filled it out yet. So I grabbed a burn that's on the current burn plan, but it's not been scheduled. So this element gets filled out 24 to 48 hours ahead of the ignition. So that's why it's not filled out. That's why it's blank. But I grabbed it because I thought it was not a bad example, even though the text wasn't very legible, of how this one's gone through and some of the considerations have been incorporated in it. So I thought it was quite a good example of a burn that's got lots of complex considerations that have all been reflected on as by this process, has been supported by really good peer review and gone right through our approvals process at the planning stage. If people wanted an example of one that's been filled out from start to finish, we'd grab a different burn a burn that's been completed. But as far as the numbers that people are looking at there, I'd say please don't pay too much attention to them. I'd recommend, if you're looking at any of the numbers, go to the decision support tool that Brian's been talking about last month and focus your attention on those, and we've built around that with this process.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Mike?
Yes, it does, thanks.
Okay. Any further questions for Steve? Great. Thank you again, Steve, for your time today in presenting that.
You're welcome.
Yep. For those that are interested in seeing it again or would like other people in your agencies to see it, we will be making the recording available on YouTube, possibly within a week to 10 days. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for your time today.